Any thoughts on how organizations can capture and preserve stories? Even if we generate great stories, they tend to walk out the door as staff and board and volunteers rotate.
Oh, yeah, that's an important one, right? Because the stories, as we all know, are invaluable to your marketing and even your culture of the organization. So I'm a huge believer of creating a story bank. And this is going to be a pretty straightforward answer. Like, figure out whatever that is, whatever system you use, if it's, whether it's a Google Doc or spreadsheet or something else, right? You have this kind of story bank, storytelling library that you either archive, you find a way to just list it. Someone who's good in organization, your organization can actually put a brief summary, organize it into what was the kind of theme or topic of this story. And what were we trying to achieve? Like, what was the end outcome? Was it a success story? Was it a sad story? Was it a creation of our organization story? Like, what was the kind of like theme of the story? And so getting it organized so you can actually have it and have even links to maybe a Word doc or something. Again, I sound old school with Word doc, like maybe it's not a Word doc, right? Maybe there's a fancier system out there. I'm sure there is some app or database or something out there that does this, but whatever that system is for you, like having a link to it that you can refer back to. Or if you did a video, like how many times do we hear, Andy, people who are talking to donors or like, let me capture your story of why you got involved, or let me capture this client's story of how this organization changed their life. And sometimes that's done online or with, video through video. So having any of those related links also tied to it. So you have really easy access because I feel bad when I think organizations lose that and don't have a system, because you can reuse some of this stuff. I mean, you're not going to reuse it a month later, but you can reuse it a year later, a couple of years later. Hey, there was this story when, and instead of racking your brain, because Andy, I don't know about you, but how many times have you been in a meeting where someone says, what's a good story that we've recently experienced or seen that showed us making a difference? And kind of you just get that blank stare because people don't always in the moment, but it's kind of about how do we actually organize what we're doing. And I also think there's a piece to this that should be said about how do you create kind of a storytelling culture. I'm a huge proponent of stories and the power of stories, and getting every staff member to be able to even hear stories, because even just finance folks or IT folks or people who are HR folks who are behind the scenes and don't always get to hear the work, it is magical if they can occasionally hear a really good story, whether it's in a staff meeting or obviously board meetings. We've all heard about kind of that mission moment idea. So huge proponent. So yeah, go to town and create that fancy Google sheet or whatever it is that you want to use.
I think your point that it needs to be recorded is important. Also, that there needs to be some intention behind it. Because when you think about it, you and I have worked for organizations, this isn't our first rodeo. We've worked with a whole bunch of different people. And one of the things that you realize is that especially if you've been someplace for a while, certain things tend to recur. And you're like, we dealt with this 3 years ago. This exact same scenario came up 3 years ago. And what did we do then? And nobody can remember. Yeah. So you have to be very intentional about we need to document not only why we're doing what we're doing, but the origin story of the organization or the origin story of a program or what the donors were thinking about when they encouraged us to move in this particular direction, what was going on in the world that made them think about that. Because one of the, you end up with, for programs, you end up with inertia. You're just doing the same program that you've been doing for years and you're not quite sure why. And it's interesting to sort of step back and go, so what drove us to create this program? What was the story behind why this thing exists? Because a lot of times it's oh yeah, there's that one donor and she was super into this thing. And so we decided to do it, but she's been dead for 10 years. And so I don't know why we're still even doing this other than now the program is a manager and we're continuing to move that direction. And because, many nonprofits, like the question said, there's sort of a constant churn of people. Like the ED might be the same, but you go through program people, you go through development people, you go through finance people, just because that's the nature of nonprofits in general, is that you tend to forget like that this has happened before. Like, and maybe, why are we doing what we're doing? So not only like on the development and like program, like good feeling stories side of it, but also like the intention of the organization and the mission of the organization. I think it's really important to like be very specific about having to capture that kind of stuff. And it's one of those things that, you don't necessarily always do automatically. It's not like, because it's not part of your job. Like nobody's told you have to do it. So you're not going to go ahead and do it unless someone says, okay, yeah, I need you to do this. Right. So coming up with, some sort of reason to document that kind of stuff, I think that would be get you moving in the right direction.
I really appreciate that lens of it too. And I was thinking about it related to succession planning as well. I was in the midst of doing some work with a client the other day that we're kind of developing and building out an emergency succession plan as well as like a planned succession plan, like, and it, for the future, for retirement. And one of the things that we took a moment and paused on is, wouldn't it be helpful for that next leader coming in to have some of what you're talking about, Andy, of here were a few major organizational milestones. Why did we choose to go in that direction? What was going on at that time? Why was that important to our organization, our values, our mission? Like, why did we do that? And sort of that stuff that you don't ever really understand. And you come into an organization and go, this seems wonky, or this seems odd, right? Like, but so what was the reasoning? And there's no one, and then everyone has selective memory, or people who were there when it was created don't remember or aren't involved anymore. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in what we're talking about.
Yeah, it's like that. You just reminded me of the very common challenge you see if an organization brings in a consultant to work on something is a good consultant will wait and like ask a lot of questions and make sure that they sort of understand the entire scenario before they start recommending it. Like we did years ago, one of our board members decided they were really excited about us having like an earned income program. They wanted us to come up with some way to just make some money because donations are hard. Like, of course, very straightforward, your normal sort of board thing. Like, I don't understand this like asking for money thing. Why can't we sell stuff? So of course, the executive director was like, I guess we have to look into this. And so they put together like a group of, I think it was either high school kids or college kids that came in to like pitch ideas of what the organization could do. And, Andy immediately is like, my eyes have rolled all the way back into my head. And I'm like, this is going to be the most excruciating thing I've ever gone through in my whole life. Like the last thing I want to do is listen to high school kids pitch me ideas about how we can earn money. And it was worse than that. It was really, some of the ideas were just completely shocking. And part of it is like everything they recommended, like even the good ideas, everything they recommended is something that we'd already internally discussed and discarded 5 years ago. Yeah. So it was like, great. That was like awesome. I love that. Thank you for bringing that up. 5 years ago, we decided not to do it because of these 100 reasons, right? So having that kind of stuff available to say like, why are we, just like you said, why are we doing what we're doing in the way that we're doing it? Like nobody writes that down. That's like, why would we do that? That doesn't make any sense, right? But it can shortcut so much just drama, and it can prevent me from having a stroke probably too.
Nonprofit governance.
Nonprofit answers.
Nonprofit board. Nonprofit management.
Nonprofit marketing. Nonprofit resources.
Welcome to Nonprofit Everything, the podcast where hosts Andy Shurick and Stacey Wedding answer your questions about all things nonprofit.
Hey, listeners, it is so great to have you here for another episode of Nonprofit Everything. I have to say that I've noticed this trend that's happening with podcasts that so many are going to video and not just audio. And I have to say that I'm not sure if you even tell us that you really want us to go to video, if Andy and I would agree to that, because we love doing audio and kind of being like super chill in the background. But I'm curious to know if you think that that is something we should ever think about or occasionally doing. It's been on my mind, and I know that I love not having to get all gussied up for this, but I would make an occasional exception. So what do you think? Is that something you'd want? I don't know. What do you think about that idea, Andy? Do you hate it like I do?
I don't know anything about video editing. I feel like that would be a project I'd have to, but I do like learning new things. So
well, see, look at how he reframed that.
No, if somebody needed it.
He reframed that very nice. I don't get we're starting this episode, but I do have to ask everyone. I'm not sure I get the value, because the ones I've seen, I guess it's fine to watch someone just talk at the screen and talk to somebody else, but I don't know, what are you visually seeing other than this person, what they look like already? Just the practical part of it. I have a hard time wrapping my brain around. What am I missing, Andy?
Yeah.
Is there something really visually appealing about looking at the two of us having these conversations?
I always find them really strange because everybody has a really oddly curated set of things behind them.
Yes.
They've all got these little weird podcast studios, and it's either they've got their YouTube award for having a whole bunch of YouTube viewers behind them, and then it might be lit with this weird neon light, and there's a plant. And it's just it always feels very fake to me.
It does. It does.
I don't know. I feel like our podcast is about authenticity, right?
Oh,
and that doesn't feel authentic to me.
Yes. Thank you. So see, that's it. But no, if you really are having a burning desire for some reason to see us at some point, let us know and we'll give it some consideration. But with that said, you are in for a treat. It's a great episode, and it is made great because of the questions we get from each of you. So appreciate you for, dropping us a line, nonprofiteverything.com. There's the ask a question button that you can't miss. There's social media where you can find us and all that jazz. So with that, enjoy this episode. Send us a question. I have been serving as the board chair and volunteer executive director of the nonprofit I founded. We are finally at a stage where we're ready to pay me as executive director. I would like to move from wearing both hats to being just the full-time paid executive director, and my board is supportive of this. As we look at creating our budget for upcoming fiscal year, do I just set my own salary and include in the budget, or how exactly does this work?
I like that. This is one way to do it for sure.
Yeah, I want to pay myself $1 million.
$1 million because I am worth it, and you know it. Yeah, so it's an interesting scenario, right? Because that's not usually how it works, but honestly, it probably is usually how it works, is that probably the vast majority, when you go from non-paid to paid, if it's the same person that's in the role, they just assign themselves a salary. And usually it's something just embarrassingly low. Yes. Right. It's I'm going to give myself $10,000 a year to do this job. Totally. Right. Because they feel the responsibility of paying, raising the money to pay for their own salary seems really uncomfortable. And, so it's, we joke that it was going to be super high, but in reality, it's almost always really, really low. The right way to do it is to recognize that you have a conflict of interest right out of the gate, which is probably why you're asking the question, is because it all your conflict of interest alarms just went off. And so you kind of need to sort of take your, sort of split your personality into two pieces. You've got I'm a person that would like to have this job person. And then you've got the other personality, which is I'm sort of responsible for the longevity of this organization and want to make sure that we're doing things properly. So the right way to do that is with an employment contract. And it's so first you'd probably need to shed yourself of the board chair role. So that needs to happen as step one. Stacey's agreeing. So that there is no conflict of interest there. And then enter into a conversation with the board and the board chair and the new board about what an appropriate compensation level for you would be, with the knowledge that you're no longer dictating it. You're negotiating it with your board. Your board is going to be super supportive of you. They're going to probably give you whatever it is that you ask for. So that's probably going to give you a sense that you need to temper your expectations. But in these scenarios, a contract, an employment agreement, an employment contract is probably the smart way to go, because then all of the expectations are set down in writing. And then when the auditor asks you a year from now, so you've got this new role, you've got a person paid. How did you come up with their salary? Like what the question is. And that's actually a question on the 990 that you're going to have to fill out, which says, like, how did we set the compensation for the top executive? And what you want to say is, we did a compensation study. We did a survey of similarly situated people in similarly situated markets. And this is what the average is. And we are well within the average. And we have an employment agreement that was negotiated without any conflicts of interest between the board and the executive director. So I think that's probably the way I would go. And you also kind of want to just protect yourself from, the inevitable annoying newspaper story that's going to come out a year from now once your salary becomes public.
I'm curious to know, with the employment contract or agreement, it's interesting to hear you suggest that. And I don't disagree. I think about how oftentimes I hear employment agreements and contracts come with much larger organizations. I haven't thought about it related to a little baby organization, which is what it sounds like, a very small nonprofit. Do you think of that as like, do you think there has to be because I could see where a board would start to then freak out. Oh my gosh, like we don't know the first thing about an employment contract. We don't have money to hire whatever, an HR expert to help and legal expert to help us, whatever. Like, do you think you have to have that? You think there's a way to do this and just like not do the contract, but the board still goes through whatever, a small committee that has to do the research and then come up with it. So you have that process you can say you have for the 990, but not need the contract. What do you think?
I see where you're coming from. I'm a huge proponent of contracts in general. And I recognize that but I'm also not a huge proponent of like the legal profession in general either, right? Because the reason people don't want to do a contract is because it's expensive. You end up with a document that no one can read, but it doesn't actually have to be that bad, right? A contract is really, and like, so one of the things we've talked about this before, one of the things that nonprofits like to do is like, we don't want a contract, we're just going to do an MOU, which is just a contract that has a different name, which is just fine, right? Mm-hmm. And if you sometimes someone might shave it and say an MOU doesn't have money in it and a contract does, but they're really the same thing. It's just a piece of paper that has, these are the things that we all agree on. Like these are all the things that we agree on, and we've agreed on all of these things, and that's it. And we're going to write our names at the bottom to say that this is what we've agreed to. So in that sense, yeah, you could somebody on your board has to have an attorney that they know that's willing to help look at something, right? If you wanted to go that direction, but it doesn't have to be like, it doesn't have to have the word whereas in it 15 times to be a true contract. It just has to be something that people have written down that says, this is what our expectations are, and this is what we're going to agree to. And, the only reason you bring attorneys in is because they are good at reading some of them, not all of them. Some of them are really good at reading contracts and understanding what all the bits and pieces mean and knowing what's supposed to go in there, just so that everybody's sort of protected and to make sure that there aren't any accidental loopholes that you've left in, right? That's why you want the attorney involved at all, but you don't have to. It doesn't have to be that complicated. It can be a one-page sheet of paper that says, this is what our expectations are. This is how often we're going to review this thing, right? What I wouldn't do is just like download nonsense from the internet and say, this is our employment agreement because we found it on a website. Like that's a terrible idea. You're much better off just going the naive route and just writing something down that's like, this is what we're going to agree to.
Yeah, I like taking some of that, the barriers that keep people from doing it, take that away if needed. Like, I mean, I too am in the camp with you about contracts are important. I too, there's good attorneys and bad attorneys like every profession, right? There's like good legal counsel and not, but I also think it could get overly complicated with bringing in legal counsel for something like this, unless they really understand that this is not going to be, a super sophisticated, drawn up multi-page agreement, right? Like it doesn't need to be, it can be pretty straightforward. I think the other thing with contracts, and I don't know, this probably wouldn't be needed here, but I know a lot of sort of executive director contracts have that clause about dismissal, right? And if XYZ happens, you're guaranteed this amount of income, whatever is negotiated, you're guaranteed this amount of income. And I do think there's times that really can make a lot of sense. Particularly, you and I have heard of these rogue board situations where you get board member who wants your job or wants the executive director job and will do everything in their power to push against or try to disprove and discredit that individual. And that individual is then without a life jacket. It's just not cool. So I think contracts and thinking through some of those things is helpful. I don't know if that's overkill for this stage of it, but it does feel like, again, thinking through some of those basic things to try to just protect the organization and because you also don't want, if the ED just says, I'm up and leaving. Here you go, right? Here you go. I'm ticked off. I'm the founder and I don't like the direction you're going. I give you my resignation. I'm out tomorrow. That's not cool either.
Yeah. And I think any HR person would tell you that you need to have some sort of employment letter. Yes. You wouldn't hire anybody for your organization without some sort of piece of paper that says, this is what we're going to pay you. This is how often you're going to get paid. There's some very specific rules about what you need to put in that. So at the bare minimum, it needs to have that. I don't, termination reasons and stuff like that. I don't know that you need to, unless you're super concerned about it. I don't know that you'd need to go that far. And again, anything that makes it overly complicated, I think, especially at that stage, I don't know that that's necessarily important. I think you just really want to say, this is our agreement. This is what we're talking, just so that we all know we're on the same page, and just leave it at that and not try to think about all of the random scenarios that could happen, like the rogue board member or, a meteor strike or whatever random thing's going to happen. I'm a new board chair, about 6 months into my term. I'm finding myself overwhelmed with the amount of work involved and ready to step down. Our CEO is not as strong as I thought when we agreed to serve in this role, and the board has been subpar for quite some time, if I'm being honest. I'm trying to help the organization rebuild and strengthen, but I'm wondering how best to do this without burning myself out in the process.
Hallelujah. Someone who is committed, a board chair who is active and engaged. I just first want to celebrate you for your commitment, because many of our listeners are probably going, I wish I had a board chair that was giving that much, that they are actually on the verge of burnout, right? That is not a standard practice, but please don't stop, but also don't burn yourself out, right? So, okay. All right. I wish I could just wave my wand and make sure that didn't happen. But I appreciate you already sensing this, because the reality is, and I want to take a step back before actually diving in, is for anyone listening, I think that it's really important to realize that a volunteer board role can take, particularly organization at this juncture, can take a lot of time. And so I think that people have to give some due respect and also realize they are not going to move mountains overnight. You're not going to, what's the old adage? You're not going to build Rome in a day. And you probably are a overachieving personality that's I want to get this done. I want to see progress. And this kind of change takes time. And you got to really look at the small victories along the way, and you have to realize it's going to take time. And those are I just want to first tell you that to manage your expectations, because maybe that will help. And I also think you don't have to do this all alone, right? I know that you're kind of trying to rebuild and build stronger board. And so some board recruitment right now could potentially be really helpful to identify a couple of people who, particularly in the areas that the organization's struggling, perhaps you can try to strategically recruit some folks to kind of strengthen your bench from a board perspective. I think from a CEO perspective, what kind of support can the board give or suggest to the CEO to help build their strength, right? Do they need a coach? Do they need some professional development or training in particular areas? Because that isn't incumbent on you as the board chair to have to do all of that. And that actually isn't always healthy either. That can become really codependent and awkward really quickly, especially because you're not supposed to be in the operational weeds. So if there's larger issues that the CEO is just not cut out for the job, like that may be a performance review question. But I also think it's about, has the CEO been given the supports needed or the training, or like have they had an opportunity to try to grow themselves and be a stronger leader in the ways the organization needs it? So those are a couple of thoughts. I think getting volunteer, you could recruit if you have committees, maybe you have a couple committees, or you have a safe space think tank where you bring on a couple of, if there are one or two board members that you think have potential, that you have a safe space to sort of take the burden off of just you, so you can help, right, divide and conquer. I guess I just don't want you to feel like it's all on your shoulders, which is what it sounds like you're feeling like. And I also get that when you have kind of a subpar board and CEO, because then you're just going, okay, but and how do you, like, what if there was a board retreat with the CEO where you all come up with your plan, like, of how the board's going to strengthen itself, how the CEO, how do we strengthen this organization's leadership on a board and staff level over the next year, and come up with an action plan, like something like that. And what are the kind of goals and deliverables we want to set for ourselves, and who is going to be in charge of like moving those forward, because that's where the board again can have buy-in and help. And, if all that doesn't work and you're still like, this is too much, I do think having a bit of a, kind of like a really, really honest, like vulnerable conversation with your board and with your CEO saying, this is just becoming too much, or I'm going to have to pull back. I can give you this much. Like, let's talk about what that looks like, even if this takes longer and it's a slower process to get where we need.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than being on a board that's not working very well for an organization that's not working very well.
Yeah.
It's really exhausting, and it's not fun for anybody. Like, I love all the first say that everything you said, Stacey, is exactly right. Like, there's like nothing wrong. One of the things that I think I would lean on in this case is there's most likely the board isn't totally hopeless. Like, there's probably at least a couple of people on the board that sort of feel the same way you do. And as we've said before, like, a lot of times board members, and even in actually probably especially in bigger organizations, like, they think about your organization like for the 5 minutes before they're logging onto the Zoom meeting, and then that's it until the next time that there's a board meeting, right? So you just go away from there. It's like you cease to exist until the next board meeting, right?
Yeah.
And so if you can come up with a way to like create a committee or bring some of these other board members that aren't just dead weight together to have conversations, like, you can call it an executive committee or just something else where you can get a core group of people that are working on the project together, and then bring other people on as needed. So board meetings are a lot of times they're very stilted. They're very formulaic. If they're done right, they're quick and painless.
Yes.
If they're done wrong, they're exhausting and the worst part of your day.
Yes.
But they seem to be, in many cases, a bad way to talk about, especially an organization that's not thriving. They're a bad way to solve it, because there's the constraints of the board meeting make it difficult to solve some of these like intractable issues that really need to be done one-on-one in a committee. So if you can come up with ways to potentially find smaller groups of people that can work on particular problems, like, and the question doesn't talk about why it's going wrong, right? It's just not going right. So if you can identify what the problem is, and then potentially get one of those groups of people together, even if you're not involved in it, if your fundraising is terrible, put together a little fundraising committee of 3 of the people on the board that aren't terrible, and see if they can solve it together and have that be their world, right? And as board chair, you get to do that. You get to say, I would like to create a committee that does this. who's going to be on that committee. And if there's a lot of blank stares, then you kind of know the organization is hopeless, right?
Yes.
But if people want to assist you, you'll find those one or two people that really do want to help it, because they're not on the board for no reason. Like theoretically, there was some reason that they got on the board. So we need to find that and then play to their strengths and see if you can kind of lift it up from there. I feel for you. This is an unpleasant situation to be in, and I'm sorry.
I also think there's this tendency, not knowing what your day job or your professional background is, there is a tendency to get into nonprofit, like volunteer roles or board roles, and realize how much more difficult it is because of all of the different stakeholders. You've got a CEO, right? You've got a board, you got volunteers, trying to motivate people who aren't paid to be there. It is hard work. And so to try to manage your expectations, that it is not going to look the same as when you're in your day job, where maybe you have authority to tell people what to do, and like they lose their job if they don't, right? Like it's harder.
Thanks for joining us this week. Stacey and I appreciate that you've wasted a perfectly good half an hour with us. Send us questions. The podcast gets really boring without questions. We'll just, I don't know, we'll make them up. What do we do? We always threaten to talk about kids and pets. That's the standing. We haven't gotten there yet. So send us questions. Send us, I think I said this a little while back, send us a question you think somebody else should ask. Like not one that you have, but somebody like, oh my gosh, all these people I'm talking to right now, they really need to ask this question. Yes. So send that to us. We love those, especially if it like calls somebody out. You can like send it to them and be like, look, Stacey said,
Andy said.
And you can use that as exactly. So thanks again. We'll see you in a couple weeks.